So today I'm going to be sharing the story of how I found out that I had breast cancer 2 days after finding out that I was pregnant with my second child. It was the end of January 2019, and it was Martin Luther King weekend. So 3-day weekend, everything was closed on Monday. I was sitting on the couch on Friday night watching some TV, and my left breast was itching, and so I stuck my hand this way to scratch it, and when I pulled up, I felt a lump, and I was like, well, that's not something I've felt before. So I immediately called my primary care physician. I knew that they had after hours answering services, and I also knew that they were open on Saturdays. So I thought at least I can call and try and schedule an appointment to be seen on Saturday, or at least get in as early as I can for next week. So I called the office, and it just rang and rang and rang and rang and rang. And so I called several times and it just kept ringing. So it's like, okay, I'll just go to sleep, wake up early in the morning, and I'll go up there. That way I can be sure to get in as early as possible, even if they can't see me on Saturday. So I woke up the next morning and I got ready and went up there, and they were closed. There was a sign on the door that said, "We are closed for the Martin Luther King weekend. We will reopen on Tuesday." So I was like, okay, well, I guess that's out of the question to be seen today or anytime soon. So I went ahead and called one of the local mammogram places, because I'd seen advertisements where you could just call and walk in. You didn't need to have an appointment or anything. So I called them to see what I needed to do to be seen. And they said, oh, well, if you found a lump, then you have to have a doctor's referral. So basically, what I know now is there's a diagnostic mammogram and there's a preventative mammogram. And so they can do a preventative mammogram, which is the one you're supposed to get every year, but they cannot do a diagnostic mammogram without a doctor's referral. So in the future, if you ever find a lump and you want to be seen soon, I recommend just saying that you're going in for your annual mammogram. So finally, I ended up getting a hold of my doctor's office on Tuesday, and I went in on Wednesday, and they saw me, and I told my doctor that we were trying to get pregnant, and she felt it. She said, "It feels like a cyst. You're probably pregnant, and you just don't know it yet. But we'll go ahead and have you go in for a mammogram just to be safe." And so she was able to schedule me the next morning at 7:45. I actually had to lie to my mom because I didn't want to tell her what I was doing. So I told her I had a delivery for work early in the morning. So I asked her if she could take my son to school. And so I went in, and the lady's like, "Oh, it looks just like a cyst, and I bet you're really pregnant." She says, "I bet you this time next week you're going to find out that you're pregnant." She said, "But we'll go ahead and biopsy it anyways, just to be safe." So that was Thursday. So they scheduled my biopsy for Tuesday. Well, Monday, we found out that we were pregnant. So I was like, okay, cool. So it's just a cyst. It was pregnancy cyst from the hormones from the baby, or however that works. So when I went in on Tuesday and I told them, they're like, "Oh, we knew it." They're so proud of themselves because they called it. And so when they did the thing, they were like, "Okay, so we're gonna put this little marker in, that way you know in the future, if you ever find this lump again, it's been marked, that way you know that this is the one that we already found and was just a cyst. But if it doesn't go away after you give birth, then that way they'll know which one to take out if it ends up bothering you too much." So they made no big deal about it at all. They were like, "This is totally normal for pregnancy." And so I didn't think anything of it. And then I got a call on Thursday, so 2 days later, and I was at work, and I didn't recognize the number, but I know the city that it was in, and I figured it was them. And so I answered the phone, and she's like, "Is this April?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Do you have a minute?" And I was like, "Oh no." So I closed my office door and I sat down, and she said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but you have breast cancer, and it's triple negative breast cancer. It's the most aggressive kind. You need to get this removed immediately." And I was like, "Okay, I'll get this figured out." And so I own a business, and when I got that news, I was like, I can't be at work. I got to go home. I got to tell my husband. So I just packed up my stuff, walked out the door, locked my office door, and told my employees, I said, "Look, I got to go. I have an emergency. I don't know when I'll be back, but text me if you need anything," because at that point I didn't want to be talking to anybody on the phone if I didn't have to. So right away on the way home, I didn't want to call my husband and tell him over the phone, but I knew I needed to get an action plan together. So I called my insurance company, and I told them what was going on, and they said, "Okay, well, we'll work on finding you a breast surgeon that can get you in as quickly as possible." And so my insurance assigned me a dedicated person to help me. Her name is Jessica, and she's been so helpful during all of this. But she was calling around trying to find me somebody that could see me right away. my primary care provider was also trying to find me a breast surgeon in her network that could see me right away, given the nature of the pregnancy, and it was very urgent to get this out as soon as possible. And then my husband and I were also calling around trying to find places, and everywhere we were calling, they would say, yeah, we can get you in 3 or 4 weeks. And I was like, no, they said it has to come out immediately. And they're like, well, 3 or 4 weeks is pretty fast. I'm like, no, it's not. So we went to bed, woke up the next morning, and I got a call from my primary care provider, and she said, hey, one of the breast surgeons in our network has an appointment available at noon today. Can you make it? And I was like, absolutely. So my husband had called in to work. I don't think at this point he had told them what was going on yet, but he took the day off work to spend with me. And we went up there and went through the whole thing with her, and she scheduled it for, so we were there on Friday. She scheduled it for the following Thursday. So the following Thursday was Valentine's Day. So my mastectomy was on Valentine's Day. So Friday we met the breast surgeon. Monday we met the oncologist. How we found an oncologist that could meet us right away is kind of crazy too, because I guess that's another one of those things that you don't normally get to do right away as well. Monday we met the oncologist, and that was probably the worst meeting of all, because that was when we talked about the chemo and everything else, and knowing that I was going to have chemo and I was going to have to do it while I was pregnant. I didn't even know it was possible to do chemo while you're pregnant, but what we had determined is that we would wait until my second trimester. So I was 5 weeks pregnant when I met with the oncologist the first time, and she said you have to be at least 14 weeks pregnant because you need the placenta to be established, because the placenta filters out the chemo. So we had to wait until 14 and a half weeks pregnant to get in for chemo. So we got that scheduled. I went every Tuesday. So that was Monday. Tuesday, we actually got to meet the OB. My original OB from when I had my older son had retired, and so we had to find a new one. So we got a new OB, and we met her on Tuesday, got to actually see the baby. And you don't normally get to see the baby at not even 6 weeks yet, but because of the situation, they wanted to confirm how far along the baby was and, make sure that it was a viable pregnancy and all that. So we got to see the baby, we got to talk a little bit about what the plans were. And then Wednesday, I had to go in for a pre-op at the hospital. Not only did we do all the paperwork, but they also did this thing where they inject the tumor with dye, and then they watch to see what lymph node is the primary node that your breast drains into. That way they know the first lymph node to check to make sure and to check and see if it has spread at all. So that was Wednesday. And then Thursday morning at like 6 o'clock in the morning, we had to go to the hospital. I had my mom, my husband, my aunt, and my uncle, and they were all there to cheer me on and wait in the waiting room to see what the doctor had to say. So I went in for my mastectomy while I was pregnant. At that point, they can't monitor the baby during anesthesia, so we just had to kind of hope for the best. And the doctor came out in the middle of my surgery and announced to the crowd that it hadn't spread. It was just the one little lump of cancer, and it had been fully removed. And it's what's called clear margins, which basically means all the tissue around it is clear. So they took the whole left breast. They didn't want to do the other one at the same time, even though I wanted the other one done, because they wanted to limit the baby's exposure to anesthesia. So that was that. That was Friday. And then basically I just went home to heal and waited for chemo to start. So I got to see the baby a couple more times in between, and we found out, I think at like 10 or 11 weeks, which is a lot earlier than we did last time, we found out that we're having another boy, which I was actually really excited about, because even though it's triple negative breast cancer, and so it's not a genetic thing, I was still excited that I had a little bit less worry having 2 boys instead of having a girl that could possibly have a likelihood of getting breast cancer in the future. So I was happy to find out that we're having another boy, but I knew this. Even before all of this, we knew that this was going to be the last kid anyways, because I am now 38, my husband is 42, and so we don't want to be having kids, much later than that. So basically we just hung out at home. I healed, went back to work a little bit here and there while I waited to start chemo, and then at 14 and a half weeks pregnant, I had my first chemo. And so my protocol was 4 adriamycin and Cytoxan, so they call that AC. Some people call it the red devil because it's actually red. The stuff that they put into your veins is red. And I had 4 of the AC, and those are every other week. And then I had 16 of what they call, I had 12 Taxol, so a total of 16 chemos. And so everything kind of went as planned for the most part. they recommended that you shave your head around day 17 after your first chemo treatment, because your hair starts to feel really heavy and starts to be painful. I didn't really want to experience that, plus I didn't want my hair just to be falling out all over the place. So I shaved my head down to a buzz cut on the Monday, so I think it was like day 13, so right before my second chemo treatment. And right on schedule, my hair kind of started falling out. The little pieces that were like that big were falling out here and there. They ended up kind of leaving like a mohawk thing. That's about all that I had left by by the time I ended up deciding just to kind of like scrub it off really hard. But everything was going pretty much according to plan. My hair started growing back about 5 weeks into Taxol. So I had heard from some people that your hair will start growing back a little early, and it did. I wasn't totally sure that it was because it kind of looked like just little blackheads, and I would notice on I swore I could feel hair on my legs even though I couldn't really see it, but I could feel it. And then I kept taking pictures like really up close, trying to see if I'm really getting hair or not, and sure enough I was. And so by the time I actually finished chemo, I had about this much hair all over my head, which was pretty cool. But so about 30 weeks pregnant, I think I had 3 or 4 Taxols left. I went into labor the first time. So I already had an OB appointment, and I was on my way to drop my son off at school or at summer camp, and I thought I was having contractions, so I walked in and they're like, okay, well, we'll go ahead and get you back there early so they can check. And she's like, oh yeah, you're definitely having contractions. You're definitely in labor. And so we actually had, I think I went into labor 3 or 4 times before I actually had my son. So I ended up having to skip 1 Taxol. I think it was my 10th or 11th Taxol, because I was in the hospital overnight with them trying to stop my labor, because they wanted to get me to at least 35 weeks pregnant, and I think I was only 31 or 32 weeks pregnant that first time. So I had to skip 1 Taxol, but I didn't want to skip all of them. So I resumed my Taxol, and then I think at 33 or 34 weeks, it was like every other day I was going into labor. And so I had 1 Taxol left, and I had my one last Taxol on Tuesday. And when I was there, I told them, I think we need to hurry this along. I'm not really one to ask for special permissions, but I said, can I not have to wait for a chair? Can you just take my vitals and send me right back to the chemo room so I can get my chemo and go home? Because I feel like I'm gonna have my baby tonight. And they're like, okay, we'll get that taken care of for you. So they did, and sure enough, I was having contractions as it was finishing. And with Taxol, they recommend that you wrap your fingers and your toes in ice to keep neuropathy out and to protect your finger and toenails. And so I was wrapped up in ice and bundled up in blankets and going into labor. I knew I was going into labor, so luckily the minute they finished it, they unhooked me and I bolted out the door and ended up in the hospital again that night. And I was 34 and a half weeks pregnant. And they said, we really want to get you to 35 weeks pregnant, because anything under 35, you have to have a NICU stay for the baby. And so they stalled it one more time, and then they said, okay, if it happens again, we're just going to let it go. So that Tuesday when that happened, and then it was either Thursday or Friday, I can't remember now, but I woke up in the morning. My mom was going to take my son to school for me, but she had texted me asking me to go ahead and wake him up, and I didn't feel like getting up, so I didn't. I just pretended like I didn't see the text message because I was so tired and so worn out, and also trying to keep the baby growing. And so I just ignored it, and I heard her open my back door, and when she opened the door, I was like, oh, I better go ahead and get up. And so I pushed the button on my couch to put the legs down and slowly start getting up. And right when I did that, I felt a pop, and I was like, oh no. And so sure enough, my water had broke. So my mom rushed me to the hospital, dropped my son off at school, came back to the hospital, and I had a baby later that day. So the baby was born at 34 weeks and 6 days. He was like 8 hours shy of being 35 weeks gestation. So he still had to have his required NICU stay overnight, but they said he was like the toughest baby they've ever had in there. He didn't even cry when they do all the shots and the heel pricks and all that stuff that they do on the babies. And so we got to go home 3 days later, and now the baby, he's 9 months old. His name is Michael. Michael means gift from God, and that's definitely what he is, because we feel like he kind of saved my life by, so what I left out earlier is what looked like a cyst that actually ended up being a tumor. My breast surgeon said that the tumor was surrounded by a cyst. So, and the cyst was hormonal, and the cyst had never been there before because I washed myself the same way in the shower every day, and I had never felt it before. So we feel like he caused the cyst to show up, and may possibly even wrap itself around the cancer to protect us from it. So he's definitely our gift from God. And I guess I will also add, I have another YouTube video that kind of shows how my hair grew back over the course of finishing chemo, and for about the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 months or so after chemo. But I just got a real haircut. I've had a lot of neck trims and ear trim, like trims around the ear. They call it an edge up. It's like a men's haircut. It's like $6 or something. But this was my first real kind of shape haircut. But I have a lot of hair now. I think I have about 5 inches or so. So this is definitely not where I want it to be, but I'm very happy to finally have what I feel like is a real hairstyle. So after giving birth, I was planning on having the deep flap reconstruction surgery. I was supposed to have it about 6 weeks after birth, but I wasn't ready for that. I had to get a hernia repair done first. And so I ended up having the deep flap reconstruction surgery done at about, I think it was 5 months postpartum. And I'm about 4 months post-surgery now, and looking at my revision surgery just to do a little bit of fine-tuning and some liposuction and to smooth things out and, you know, just make it look a little bit better. But my surgeon was excellent, and I'm really happy with my results, and you know, everything is kind of starting to get back to normal. So I'm going to go ahead and link some products down below, just some things that helped me out through chemo, through the mastectomy, through the reconstruction, some compression stuff. And thank you for watching.